I read 12 books in 12 weeks, all in Spanish. So I want to give a little bit of context for this challenge and talk about why I decided to set myself this little target first of all. So there are two main reasons that I decided to give myself this little challenge. The first was, as some of you might know, I decided to set myself the initial challenge of doing 400 hours of Spanish immersion over the last 6 months of 2020. And basically what I realized was the more I got into reading, the more I realized that not only was it the most useful activity for me in terms of my Spanish learning, but it was also becoming my favorite activity. So I decided that, I should dedicate a bit more time to that. But the second reason has more to do with my lack of impulse control. So basically during the first lockdown that we had here in England, I got a little bit obsessed with buying books in Spanish, even though I hadn't actually read the ones that I'd already bought. And so I ended up with a bit of a pile of Spanish books, and I decided, well, let's try and actually read them, right? Let's get through them. So I said to myself, okay, 12 books in 12 weeks. Let's see what happens. Okay, so real quickly, I've put a list of all 12 books that I read in the description box below. Later on in the video, I'm going to come to kind of recommendations, thoughts on my favorites, most useful books for learners and stuff like that. But anyway, if you want the full list, that's in the description box below. Okay, so the first thing I want to start with is kind of my methodology for reading, I suppose, if you can call it that. Because realistically, I don't have a whole lot of methodology, but the way that I read would fall under the band of extensive reading, which is to say that when I'm reading, I'm not reading intensively and trying to break down every sentence and every phrase. I'm not researching every single word that pops up that I don't understand. My goal when I'm reading is to follow the main story, the main points of the story, the main points of each chapter, be able to understand what's happening, and then obviously any other details that I can pick up around that is even better. Another part of my method with reading is that not only do I read, I also listen to the book at the same time. So I have the physical or ebook, and then I have the audio book that I listen to at the same time. There's two main reasons for this. The first is that it really helps me to improve my listening comprehension and my pronunciation. So obviously my listening comprehension gets better because I get to hear the words spoken at native speed, but also read along with it. And so my brain gets to understand kind of the differences between these sounds and how to pass them and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of my pronunciation, I think that reading and listening at the same time has been really helpful, because basically you're going to recreate the voice that you have in your head. And so if I'm just reading in Spanish, chances are I'm going to fall into the trap of reading it with kind of English pronunciation or more English pronunciation. And so the fact that I get to hear all of these stories, all of these words read in a native Spanish accent, means that the voice that I recreate in my head, and thus the pronunciation that I use, is something a little bit closer to natural pronunciation. I wouldn't say that I have fantastic pronunciation in Spanish at all, but I have been complimented on it insofar as it's not terrible or not like blatantly obviously English. And so I credit the listening and reading at the same time for that. Okay, so now I've talked about how I've been reading, let's talk about the kind of results. What actually happened after reading 12 books in 12 weeks? So I wasn't expecting to see any huge changes or huge improvements in my output, in my speaking. The biggest changes that I was expecting or that I was hoping for were largely to do with my comfortability with the language, my comfortability in understanding. And so I think that's definitely the main thing that I've got out of this. I think that, of course, my vocabulary has got better, and I've maybe got a little bit more secure on some more advanced kind of structures and different things like that. But I think the main thing that I've noticed is that my experience of consuming Spanish content is just a lot more comfortable and a lot more enjoyable. If I compared reading a novel now to the first time I tried to read a novel in Spanish, I think now I'm able to kind of sit back and just really enjoy the book and just take it all in, whereas before it was quite an intensive activity. Even though I was trying to read extensively, it was still quite an intensive activity because it was a lot of effort for me to understand everything. But the biggest difference, I think, or the biggest impact this challenge has had for me so far, from what I've been able to notice, is I think I've been able to develop a lot more of a deeper connection with the language and with the words itself, a deeper emotional connection, let's say. I think the reason for that is that because reading is a lot more of an active process for me than, say, watching a series. I think, if I'm watching a series, things like how the room looks and how the people look, the facial expressions, the weather, and all this kind of stuff, it's all shown to me on the screen. So no one uses language to communicate those things, I just see them. But obviously in a book, the writer has to use language to actually get all those things across. So there's a lot more content in that sense, but the reason I say that I think I've developed like a more of a deeper emotional connection is because I'm the one that's actually having to create those images now in my head. So when I read a page, that just describes a scene, that's describing a character or whatever, I have to sort of make the effort. Well, I suppose not make the effort, but naturally, with time, my brain has started to create clearer and clearer images of what I think these people look like, or what I think this place looks like, or what I think this facial expression is. Rather than just knowing that this word means this thing in English or vice versa, when I hear the word, when I see the word, I feel it and I see it in my mind. And I think that's a really important thing. That's definitely something that I've gotten out of this process so far. And another quite interesting thing to me that I've gotten out of this that I hadn't actually thought about before, it wasn't really a goal of mine, is that my reading skills have actually improved. And what I mean by that is that when I first started, it was not an effort to keep up with the audiobook, but I had to kind of pay attention. I had to make sure that I was actually focused and it wasn't just this passive thing that was just happening to me. Whereas now I've actually noticed there's been a few occasions where I've actually started to read ahead of the audiobook. I've maybe only a sentence or a couple of sentences. I'm not saying I'm reading at double the speed that they're reading the audiobooks at, but that's definitely another thing that I've gotten out of this process. My reading in Spanish has improved a lot, or my ease of reading, my speed of reading has improved a lot, which is another cool thing, but it was quite unexpected. And so yeah, like I said before, I wasn't expecting to see a huge change in my output. The main thing I was hoping for was just to feel more comfortability with the language internally, which I think I achieved. And so I think the more that I practice speaking, the more that I'm going to be able to employ this new vocabulary, these new structures, and to be able to use this new comfortability to improve my output as well. Okay, so let me talk about kind of my recommendations, my feelings on a couple of these books. I'm not going to talk about all of these books, but I wanted to talk about my favorite, my least favorite, and I suppose the one that I think would maybe be most helpful, most useful, most readable for language learners. So my favorite book that I read during this 12 weeks was called El Color del Silencio. The reason that I liked this book was because it was intriguing but kind of slow burn at the same time. I read a lot of books during this 12-week period that were there were thrillers that were very fast-paced, they're very fast-moving, that didn't really let you breathe. This story was very intriguing and very interesting. It had these kind of historical elements as well, which I liked, but it was also it was quite slow burn, like I say, so it was a little bit more enjoyable. I just felt like I had more time to enjoy it and to take it all in. The book that I liked the least would be La Piel del Tambor, which is a book written by a guy called Arturo Pérez Reverte. The main reason I think I didn't like this book is that it's just very difficult. I understood what was happening and I could enjoy the story and these kind of things, but it's written with very advanced vocabulary, even for native speakers. I spoke to a few people that said that, they don't enjoy his books because of the way that he writes, the type of vocabulary and all this kind of stuff. So that was probably my least favorite. The book that I would say I think is the most useful, or the book that I would recommend for most language learners would be Reina Roja. The two main reasons that I would recommend this book. The first is that it's a good book, it's interesting, it's got a cool story, it's got cool characters. The second is actually the style, the way that it's written. It's written in very short chapters. It's very catchy, it's very gripping, it's very fast paced, so it's very easy to read both in small chunks and in large chunks. And if you enjoy it, it's the first of a trilogy, so you can continue to read, same author, same style, and yeah, I just think the way that he writes is quite cool, quite easy, or easier for language learners, I would say. So if I was going to recommend one book, it would be that book. So I want to finish with some sort of closing thoughts on the whole process, I suppose. So, well, my grand takeaway, I would say, is that for me, reading is king. Like I said before, I think reading has been absolutely the most useful thing for me. I totally get that reading is not everyone's thing. For me, actually, I was never interested in reading fiction before I started learning Spanish. I used to read non-fiction, but I never liked fiction. And so even if reading's not your thing, I would definitely say give that a try, because you might find that it's a lot more interesting than you thought it was. Because reading in another language, I think the whole process is just a lot more fun, because you're deciphering this whole new code, essentially. It's like a treasure hunt of kinds. On the whole thing of, words that I look up and all this kind of stuff, I don't have a specific method for how I look up words. To me, it's just words that seem interesting and or important. I don't know how I judge that. It's just something in my head, so I can't be super specific with that, unfortunately. Okay, so that pretty much rounds out my thoughts on this whole process. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and found it interesting. Again, I've left the list of all of the books that I read below in the description. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps, and really glad that a lot of you have been enjoying the channel enough to want to subscribe. And so yeah, thank you again for watching this video. If you have any questions, leave me a comment in the leave me a comment in the comment box below. And yeah, thank you again for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Hasta luego.